sessions have to accord the importance that this deserves. It cannot be looked at askance. We cannot overlook this. There have to be thoughts on this issue in our society, and that's why we are involved in the public arena to precisely uphold our values, our religious morals, and our ethical ones as well. And we reject emphatically the totalitarian exclusion of the Organization of American States that has not looked at this education. Let me just end by underscoring the importance of this human right. We have to have access within the American states and the court, and in all arena, we have the right to be heard, to have these things in the OAS, to take into account this sector of civil society. We demand that our human rights be respected. We have to have our freedoms of the family. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Marquez. Our next speaker is Ms. Sylvia Regina, who will speak for the Coalition of Religious Beliefs and Spiritualities in the Dialogue with Civil Society. Ms. Regina, you have.
Representatives of the states, colleagues from civil society, warm greetings from the Coalition of Religious Beliefs and Spiritualities in the Dialogue with Civil Society. The interpreter laments that the speaker's delivery is at best chopped. One will do the best to summarize. The interpreter laments the delivery and sound are wanting for this coalition of religions, beliefs, and spiritualities in the dialogue with civil society. The interpreter regrets that Sylvia Regina cannot be understood. The coalition of religions, beliefs, and spiritualities in the dialogue with civil society has sound which is wanting. It is not possible, laments the interpreter, to provide you with the message from the coalition of religions, beliefs, and spiritualities in the dialogue with civil society. The interpreter regrets that the sound for Sylvia Regina is wanting. Both her video and sound are wanting, laments the interpreter.
We thank you, interpreter. We appreciate your challenge. We also thank Ms. Regina for her intervention. And now to conclude this round, I invite Ms. Rosa Maria Kaya to take the floor for the Coalition Democracy, Freedom, Justice, and Political Renewal. You have the floor.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. In the face of COVID, that has underscored the weaknesses and has showed us that we need a more adequate system to deal with this, and has called on humanitarian activities in Venezuela. We are looking at other countries as well in terms of human rights, considering the situation of human rights in all corners of the country. There is a lot of arbitrary behavior, considering that democracy and the rule of law in Venezuela and Nicaragua has been breached. We underscore this grave situation in these countries. And more attention must be paid for the population. And we also have to look at drug trafficking and corruption. There is a lack of guarantees in Venezuela. Given the situation, there is a dictatorship that breaches the law and fundamental rights, such as freedom of association and expression, access to information. And thus, this makes it difficult to have access to the internet with all the blockages. Given all of this, we ask member states represented here to, number one, require respect for life, integrity, and freedom for all Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, and Cubans, as well as all those who defend human rights, journalists, and others who work in the hemisphere, as well as the freedom for all political detainees in the region. We have to look at the interests and for security, and have to support things that are for security, humanitarian aid that has been blocked for many years. Humanitarian assistance for Cuba has to be looked at for, given the Inter-American Convention against or for rights and guarantees for the other victims of abuses have to be looked at. We have to look at citizens who are dealing with dictatorships. We have to respect human rights and look towards other links for guarantees that will re-energize democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Makaya, for your intervention. That completes the second round of civil society. And now I open the floor to delegations from member states for their intervention. I will recognize Argentina. Argentina, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. In addition to the different topics, we're looking at civil society and states. One should ask, we're asking for these countries, looking at their demands and appeals. Are there specific isolated mistakes or shortcomings, or does it have to do with an entire system? I'm talking about an production order, an order of consumption, of accumulation. This had led to a point on power, but we also have to look at moral issues, other issues that have to do with weaknesses. And this is the situation we're looking at through a concentration of wealth of a handful of wealthy people and states. We have to see that they have imposed the need to regulate and lay waste rules with less ability to regulate economic systems. And this has impoverished the population and enriched others. So we see that there's a disconnect. This is a system which has systems to guarantee if you can transfer resources or have other kinds of operations. But the free circulation, this was the model at the time for the productive factors. But you've got capital and human resources. The circulation of goods and services are the basis done logically that guarantees the transfer of tangible and intangible goods. But when we have state deregulation and the population becomes more impoverished, when there is the movement of people who go from one poor country to a more developed country, well, then you've got other issues to look at. Not only do you build or have policies, but you're building walls. There's a disconnect, incongruencies in these systems. So we always focus on the topic of development and the topic of impoverishment. But some countries have grown, they're nationalistic, they speak to hate, but generally, this is not what we see when you have, for example, tourists or other situations. There's no disparaging of foreigners. No. There is a disparaging of foreigners when there's a certain outlook. So that given this, our systems have to re-energize their coherence so that they can re-energize and have hope. This is a challenge, and it's going to be the economic power. And as to whether or not states are going to rebound, the capacity to re-energize the economic system. And it's not going to be the intermediary of the private sector. No, we're talking about creating political power and economic over power, because economic power deals with its own historical interests and states. We have to manage what we have, our own wherewithal. I believe in the rights of people to manage themselves. Thank you very much.
The chair thanks the distinguished ambassador of Argentina for his remarks. I now invite the chair recognizes Ambassador Hugh Adsett from Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon, and I'm going to take just half a second actually to see if I can slightly zoom in my camera. There we go.
Ambassador, your volume is extremely low. We can't hear you.
That's it. And I'm the ambassador and permanent representative of Canada to the OAS here in Washington. I wanted to make a couple of points.
Your volume is extremely low.
Can you hear me now?
Very, very, very low.
Can you hear me now?
A little better.
If it's not good, I'll sign off and sign back in again. Is it still not good?
No, it's getting better. I think you need to speak closer to the mic.
How's this?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, friends. Let me continue with this, and I'm really sorry for the audio disruption. I hope you hear me well enough now, and the interpreters can hear as well. I wanted to make a couple of points this afternoon. First, thanks to civil society. Thanks for your participation today. And thanks for the work that has been done by so many civil society actors during the course of the pandemic. The pandemic, of course, has touched the lives of millions of people, and it continues to affect us all in ways I think that we are still beginning to understand. What we've seen from civil society has been a response, swiftly springing into action, and other actors as well have swiftly sprung into action in response. This response has been really important, but it's also important for us to look to the future. And for Canada, we believe that civil society and other actors play a critical role in all of our countries. These organizations bring their own priorities, their own interests to the countries in which they work, and their unique experiences and perspectives allow us all to be exposed to new ideas and to achieve more effective results. I had a chance to listen to the presentations this afternoon. I came away with a clear sense of the dynamism and vitality of civil society and other actors in this region. The important role that families can play has been mentioned today. Canada recognizes that there are diverse forms of families, including families made up of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex parents, and single-parent households as well. And all families, in their different sizes and forms, make an important contribution to our societies. Monsieur le Président, je suis également d'accord, comme beaucoup d'entre vous.
Chair, I also agree that the protection of human rights must remain a priority. This includes the rights of women, girls, and LGBTQI individuals. Although many challenges must still be addressed, we should recall the significant progress that has been made by civil society. Thank you again for giving us the opportunity to take part in this meeting today.
We thank the ambassador, the distinguished ambassador of Canada, for his remarks. And the chair will call on civil society Maria Elijah to take the floor.
The crisis that we are facing worldwide has sounded the alarm and caused major changes. Borders have closed, jobs have been lost, and we see new human rights paradigms. In light of this uncertainty, societies have accepted these contingencies, but we must use this time to change our social paradigms. We are going through significant democratic changes such as the presidential election in Bolivia and the upcoming presidential elections in the US. Scientific work is being done to develop a vaccine to fight the pandemic. There's also an economic challenge. We know that if we do not address this challenge, we will see a rise in poverty and extreme poverty in the region. We must work to put an end to poverty in all of its forms, which are part of the 2030 agenda. Economic growth over the past 5 years have not brought us to the levels that we need. However, we must look at poverty reduction as an absolute goal. We must fight the injustice behind poverty and remember that the loss of hope would be the worst thing that could happen during this crisis. As civil society, we must work to recover hope and use instruments that allow us to promote recovery. We ask for the resources of our cultures to be used and for there to be recognition of the role of the family in our societies. Families are a source of solidarity for family members and can give rise to optimism. It is within the family that social capital is created for the economy, for productivity and progress. Therefore, eradication of poverty must focus on the family as one of the main agents of change. Families must be at the heart of public policies and recovery policies. I'll conclude with a call upon the Secretariat for Access to Rights and Equity to work towards inclusion and not exclusion. Thank you.
The chair thanks Ms. Maria Alejandra for her remarks. She speaks for the Coalition for Societal Progress, and she actually starts off the third and final round of this forum. And so we thank her again. The next speaker is Mr. Hugo Takuri. He will speak on behalf of the Indigenous Nations and Organizations Coalition. Mr. Takuri, you have the floor.
Señor Takuri, por favor, pida la palabra. Icon.
Very well. I don't see Mr. Takuri, and so we'll move on. I would like to invite Mr. Ricardo Baruch of the Coalition for Sexual and Reproductive Rights to take the floor. Mr. Baruch.
Saludos a todos, todas y todes.
Hello, everyone. The Americas are facing a crossroads for the recognition and protection of human rights, particularly sexual and reproductive rights. It is alarming that many of the advances that have been made are being threatened. Organizations in my coalition are asking OAS member states to address the COVID-19 pandemic and prioritize sexual and reproductive rights for all, particularly women and vulnerable girls. They are facing legal and socioeconomic restrictions to exercise their reproductive autonomy and access health. The pandemic has brought new challenges. We've seen budget cuts, suspended services, lack of emergency care, among others. Additionally, we have seen a drop in sexual education for boys, girls, and adolescents. This violates their rights to access the tools they need to make informed decisions about their bodies and sexuality. In light of this situation, international agencies have documented an increase in undesired pregnancies. There is a lack of medication for people with HIV and other health conditions. This cannot be justified, and measures should not be taken against democracy. That is why this coalition urges OAS member states to respect secularism as a fundamental principle of our democracies, ensure the provision of sexual and reproductive health services as they are necessary, especially for women, children and adolescents, migrants, indigenous peoples, and people of African descent. States must also strengthen justice systems to prevent gender-based violence and establish conditions to prevent early marriage. Children and adolescents must also receive appropriate comprehensive sexual education in schools that is based on science and free from prejudice. We also need strong budgets and political support. We ask member states to listen to the voices of civil society. We must stop repressing women's bodies and criminalizing the right to abortion. We also demand recognition of the rights of LGBTI individuals.
Thank you, Mr. Baruch, for your intervention. Our next speaker is Mr. Miguel Haslop, speaking for the Coalition on Freedom of Conscience and Expression. Mr. Haslop, you have the floor.
Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, members of the organization, to confront this pandemic, we need to have a certain approach in public arenas as well as a way to deal with the challenges. Nonetheless, it's necessary to clearly understand and do away with ambiguities. We have to look at the health crisis as well. We have to have freedom of expression, and this is in Articles 2 and 13 of the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights. We have to be aware of the health systems and the protocols, but they must respect the convictions. We have to look at the autonomy of churches and the individual in religious arenas. There has to be a freedom of expression. When people are silent or have different opinions, even in the face of health approaches in this pandemic, when we look at the media and we look at the regulation of social media, we look at different situations, such as different kinds of expressions. When we're looking at political assemblies and working of people, we must have peaceful approaches. If you silence a campaign, looking at public opinion, this is another point, but some pages in history have been sad. even today, there are dictatorships in certain parts of our continent, but also we're looking at different pages, the fight for freedom. This has to be This has to be respected. Today more than ever, we have to express ourselves, give our opinion. We have to respect our beliefs, our convictions, our moral beliefs, and our proposals for the governments to take due note of the concerns and some of the restrictions on freedom of expression, to publicly declare the right to object of citizens, assure the right of people and their families to gather, and to do the absolute necessary to avoid certain kinds of information. Therefore, this pandemic should not be an excuse for setbacks or to move backwards in the region. To move ahead, to get out of this economic catastrophe, we have to look at the freedoms and rights of all.
Thank you, Mr. Haslop, for your contribution. We continue now with Mr. Oscar Patino, who will present for the Coalition for an Inter-American Laboratory on Political and Social Innovation. Mr. Patino.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General. We have to ensure that measures are taken for the benefit of citizens through institutions and for all citizens with public policies. In these kinds of times, we need greater support of organizations, and that is why we want the Organization of American States to be in the forefront for democracy and for innovation. The Coalition on Freedom of Conscience and Expression sees the need to modernize in our region, in civil society and in the various arenas of our society. And we would like to strengthen connections amongst all parts of civil society and innovate things from public policy to all other arenas. There should be no discrimination so that we can have a robust democracy in the Americas. This coalition will support civil society as well as all movements and people for creativity so that we can have science throughout the region. The members in the public arenas walk hand in hand as we move towards respecting science, as well as other fronts that respect rights. Since 2017, we've said so that we need coalitions that deal with pertinent issues and well as practices. We have to be present so that we can deal with all of these issues with experts in a multilateral way. The publication of documents and articles and other kinds of information should be part and parcel for all civil society in the region so that we can strengthen skills and all capacities. This is necessary for civil society, and we have to do this so that we can spearhead developments and pave the way for mechanisms so that our institutions can be strong for democracy, and so that we have civil society walking hand in hand with government that is efficient.
Thank you for your presentation. I want to go back in the agenda to see whether Mr. Hugo Takuri from the Indigenous Nations and Organizations Coalition is available.
We'll try to call him, Mr. Chairman. Maybe we can continue with.
I'll proceed, and hopefully at the end of the last scheduled speaker, we can take the floor. I'd like now to give the floor to Ms. Maria Lucila Esquivel from the Coalition for the Rights of Sex Workers to make her intervention. Ms. Esquivel, you have the floor.
The interpreter points out this is a video without sounds. The video needs audio.
That's a different video. Por favor, apoyo técnico. El video no tiene sonido.
The interpreter points out there is no sound for the video.
Problem, and the sound could probably be recovered. We'll suspend the video for now and see what can happen to retrieve it, and if necessary, we'll come back to it. So
que frenen la violación a nuestros derechos humanos, pero no es así. Lamentablemente, Latinoamérica, 19 de octubre del 2000.
This is the second year that we have had the opportunity to participate in this forum. We have to look after our human rights. Given the pandemic, there is constant violence, but one of the fundamental tools to fight against combat is social cohesion. We have to assist and help sex workers. Governments have to implement policies in the region so that we can work against COVID-19. And we can work against violence. The interpreter points out that this video is wanting in sound and production. The interpreter points out that there is a triple echo for this video, and it is nigh impossible to understand the speaker. The video is replete with technical problems, points out the interpreter. The interpreter points out that this video cannot be interpreted.
A favor del respeto a la autodeterminación autodeterminación de las personas y condenen cualquier tipo de acto o actitud que pretenda imponer creencias religiosas o morales que suelen ser relativas y arbitrarias. Muchas gracias.
We thank Maria Lucila Esquivel for the video, for the portion that was understandable. And now we move to the Coalition for Building New Horizons, represented by Jose Ivan Cardigan. We ask
Good afternoon. For the community of the Americas, we're going through a serious crisis, and all crises can be looked at as a challenge from the political, social, health situation as provoked by COVID in the hemisphere and throughout the world. We have to devote ourselves to build our societies and improve them, modernize them, so that we have true democracies with respect for human rights, even as we look at ethic principles. Member states have a clear-cut responsibility to do so, but we will not move forward if we do not have policies that are accompanied by society based on the rule of law and shared common good. Based on plurality, we have to have rights for all groups. Any opposition against any group will weaken everyone, and there will only be the outcome of shuttering freedom of expression. We have to live and look at our differences, but this assembly is very germane today in that it's looking at weaknesses and it seeks to build resilience, and it takes as a basis all of the cultures of our societies. What we do have to do is work through institutions, and the most important point and our nucleus is the family. Family is our core. The second is the education of our peoples based on science, not on ideologies. And the third factor is to have a society replete with rights. We have to have a society with values for all of society. And without that, we will not have resilience. We have to offer this and see this as an opportunity to get together as a society with the rule of law that we uphold for the strengthening of our families. And obviously, we have to have a call so that we do not perpetrate discrimination, as was mentioned by my colleague. OAS with inclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cardigan. Next on our list is the Coalition for an Inclusive Economy with Social Justice, represented by Ms. Diana Sanchez Barrios. Ms. Sanchez, you have the floor.
Video, por favor, lo puede poner ahora.
Technical support, please. If a video needs to be viewed, please show the video now.
Speaker, Mr. Chairman.
Is it a video? Is it a video or is there going to be a live intervention?
Mauricio, ¿es un video o es una intervención? No le escuchamos.
Mauricio, is it an intervention or a video? We can't hear. Magali?
Es una intervención, embajador Méndez.
I think it's a video.
She's requesting the floor right now.
Yes. Okay. There may be some technical difficulties with that.
Ms. Diana Sanchez, can you please activate your microphone and your camera, please?
We're coming towards the end of this final round. We actually only have one more scheduled speaker, plus I'll go back to Mr. Hugo. So while we try to sort out that video, we'll go to the final speaker on the roster, and that will be Mr. Manuel Alvarado, who will speak on the coalition access to justice and the rule of law. Mr. Alvarado, you have the floor.
Sin justicia.
Without justice, we cannot have rule of law. We are here to say that efforts to guarantee access to justice have thus far been insufficient. The American Convention on Human Rights, Article 8, establishes judicial rights. Some organizations, however, ignore these provisions. Instead of improving access to justice services, they use this opportunity for their own advantage. They do not defend the rights of victims. For the rule of law, a strategic framework is also necessary for digital government. That is imperative nowadays. That way we can have a system of checks and balances, as well as citizen participation, even remotely. In contrast, many states have ignored the provisions they need to take to ensure rule of law. This has led to fear and panic over the pandemic. This has demonstrated how vulnerable public and private systems are because they have been unable to face this issue. There are several examples of what has been done throughout the hemisphere, but we want to denounce here one of the most serious violations of the rule of law committed by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. There was manipulation and of a case involving El Salvador. This is a violation of what has been promised by states. This information has been, or rather, we see that many measures are being imposed against countries in Latin America. The Inter-American Court has also spoken about this. In this particular case, the Commission is ignoring specific articles of the Convention on the Right to Judicial Protection and Judicial Guarantees. States must respect these rights. This is binding. Now is the time to raise our voice against the activism of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarado, for your intervention. And I'll backtrack to see whether the video for the Coalition for the Inclusive Economy is available.
It's an intervention, Mr. Chairman, and she is connected now, Diana Sanchez.
Okay, she has the floor.
Diana Sánchez, por favor, active su micrófono y su cámara.
Please activate your camera and microphone.
Ambassador Amanda, I think she has issues, connection issues, because it takes a long time, and then when she goes into the room, that she actually goes out again.
Mr. Chairman, can we try Hugo Takuri again?
Okay, we'll come back. Hopefully, it'll be sorted out shortly. In the meantime, we call Mr. Hugo Takuri, the Indigenous Nations and Organizations Coalition, to take the floor.
I do not think Mr. Takuri is connected. Ah, there he is. There he is. Hugo Takuri. Señor Takuri, por favor, active su micrófono y su cámara.
Mr. Takuri, can you please turn on your microphone and video?
Mauricio, le da la palabra, por favor, al señor Takuri. Señor Takuri, por
Mauricio, can you give the floor, please, to Mr. Takuri? And Mr. Takuri, can you activate your microphone and video, please?
Señor Takuri, no se desconecte cuando pida la...
Mr. Takuri, please don't disconnect. Please request the floor once again. Don't disconnect.
Adelante, señor Takuri, está en la...
You're in the room, Mr. Takuri. Please go ahead with your remarks. Honorable Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, ambassadors, delegates, guests. There seems to be an issue with the audio, notes the interpreter. We'll try our best to summarize. I speak on behalf of the Coalition of Indigenous Nations and Organizations to promote the main items on the regional agenda. Thank you for this opportunity. The speaker's audio is no longer available, notes the interpreter. The interpreter notes the speaker's video and audio are frozen.
think there are connection
Mexicana
issues.
sobre lo que es el colonialismo. Ahora más que nunca se debe respetar los derechos y conocimiento mundial sin precedentes que ha afectado profundamente.
The pandemic has affected deeply many indigenous nations and communities. Indigenous leaders have been working to uphold the human rights of their populations. We call upon the OAS and member states to implement the declaration and to uphold our rights to self-determination, as well as our right to a clean and healthy environment and sustainable development, as well as participation in decision-making processes. The interpreter notes there is no longer any audio for the speaker. Work must be done with indigenous leaders and communities to implement measures to combat the pandemic. Despite the pandemic, indigenous peoples have demonstrated their resilience and developed their own strategies. Programs and measures implemented by states. There's no longer any audio for the speaker. We must also work to recognize that in light of the pandemic, the OAS and member states must coordinate their efforts with regional bodies such as the Pan American Health Organization in order to provide medicine and information in indigenous languages.
We really would have loved to hear Mr. Tukuri's entire presentation, but it seems he might be in an area where he's having signal transmission problems. Nevertheless, we thank him for his intervention. And before we move
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, we have Diana Sanchez connected again. Diana Sanchez, the speaker that was not able to present.
yes, Ms. Ana Sanchez for the Coalition for an Inclusive Economy with Social Justice. You have the floor.
In addition to a health crisis, the pandemic has led to an economic crisis, which has hard hit many people who have not been able to help their families. This is a health crisis. It has also led to the burgeoning of the informal economy. We have to look for a policy that protects and has measures that will provide safety nets for the informal sector, and particularly women and people with disabilities. These are some of the people who have been most affected in the work arena. States have to have progressive moves so that informal workers in public arenas can enjoy their rights. There has to be social justice so that governments can expand social safety nets for all groups with credit programs and other programs for employment and social security, including the transfer of benefits. These populations and measures are key for social building, and that is why the Coalition for an Inclusive Economy with Social Justice would like to mitigate the economic crisis and have all states so that we can have measures that allow for respecting human dignity as the supreme value of all times. We have to respect these things so that people can have a dignified life with the right to adequate nutrition, the right for dignified housing, stable work and health conditions, the right to social security or social safety. We have to ensure the minimum basic human dignity, which is a political
We're really happy we were able to get Diana Sanchez in the end. And that concludes the third and final round of the Civil Society Forum. And I'd now like to open the floor to delegations and member states that may wish to take the floor. I see no offer to take the floor. So we have come to the end of this dialogue. I thank all of you for your participation, and I wish you all the best in this 58th General Assembly of the OAS. That concludes this forum on civil society. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Congratulations, Ambassador. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.